The first thing we're going to take a look at regarding the back bracing is the center reinforcement strip. Some people call it the back strip, some people call the strip that goes in between the two back pieces of the back strip. You'll find that there are some terms that are interchangeable sometimes. To ease confusion, we're going to call this the center reinforcement strip. It is the full length of the back. We can cut it pretty short, so we can cut it right at the outline of our guitar, because we've got our heel block that's going to come in and it's going to take up a chunk of that, and we've got our tail block that's going to come in and take up a little bit of space. So I am not concerned about leaving any extra room by taking this down right up to the outline of the guitar. This center reinforcement strip is going to go right over the center seam to reinforce it. The grain on this is going perpendicular to the grain of the back. And what this is going to do is give that back seam some structural support so that it doesn't separate from itself this way. If the grain followed the back, then we could have some problems. If we had some stress, it could just split that entire center seam. But we're going to straddle that line with this center strip. And I'm going to mark the centers up top and down low, and then we're going to glue this into place. One more thing to mention, now that I was talking about calipers just before. So this is a commercial luthier's caliper. You can also use these, but as you can see, that throat is not very wide, so we're really only going to be able to get the edges. With those luthier's calipers, we are going to be able to get to the center seam and beyond and get really anywhere we want to on the entire guitar. These are super helpful. You can use this, but you will miss out some measurements on the interior. I'm going to measure the center of this and mark it with a regular pencil. We are at 14.5 millimeters. Now this doesn't have to be perfect, but keep in mind that this is going to line up dead center in the sound hole. So if things are wonky and off, you're going to be able to see that straight through the sound hole. We don't want things wonky and off. We want things as perfect as we can get them, right? Yeah. Right. Centers are marked. And you don't have to use this. If you want to use something else, you certainly can. If you have another piece of material that you want to use as the center strip that's going to have these same lines to it, one thing that I do, depending on the guitar and what the customer wants, is sometimes I'll take this strip off the bottom and the top. You can see we're plenty wide enough here, and in some you can probably get 2 lengths out of it. So I'll cut some strips off here at the bottom and take those and cross them and use those. Sometimes that's a pretty cool look if you have the same grain that's just perpendicular to itself. That can look pretty good. For this guitar in particular, I'm just going to use this spruce and get this glued up. Here is one of the smooth radius dishes. This is a 15-foot radius. This is what we're going to use for the back. It is not critical on this center reinforcement strip to have this done on the go-bar deck to get a radius out of it, because this is, that's pretty flimsy, and I don't want to break it. Pretty flimsy material. There's nothing about gluing this in on the go-bar deck itself that is going to help us get that radius. You certainly can glue this up on a flat surface. You could glue it, put some weights on it. You could use the go-bar deck with a flat surface. A number of ways you can do that. It's not necessary. Once we get into the cross braces, it does become a little more critical to get that curvature in. There are some other ways you can do it with clamps. The Go bar deck is by far the easiest and the most consistent way to do that, especially if we can sand that radius in with a radius dish. This is actually one of the cleaner reinforcement strips that I've gotten in a kit. The edges look great. There's just a couple of rough spots. The very edges of that are a little bit delicate, so I'm getting that cleaned up. All I'm doing here is taking the sanding block, cleaning up the top, softening up the edges just a little bit, because these do have some pretty hard corners on this trapezoid shape. Now that this is cleaned up, we are going to measure our center lines again. Okay. There are a couple different steps to this. One is that we know that even if we get this centered and this centered, we're still a little wiggly. So I want to put a straight edge right up against it. Center lines are matched up on the reinforcement strip. Now I am going to clamp my straight edge ruler right next to it so I don't have that problem. Double check my alignment. I like it. That looks good. That looks good. All right, now we are ready to glue it. I want to get that glue all the way out to the edges. Double check that if there is something funky somewhere, that you have that at the lower bout so that that doesn't show through. We want to hide as many of our ugly spots and mistakes as we can. Not that you would have any, but I know I do from time to time. And these Go bars can push things and make things skate a little bit. The straight edge also helps with that. So if you're going to force it somewhere, force it into that straight edge. It started to skate on me. Ha! Intercepted. Now if that looks like an awful lot of Go bars, it is. But some of these spots weren't getting pushed down to where I liked it, so I just threw a couple more on there. It all seems to be good. A good squeeze out everywhere. I'll let that sit for about 30 minutes. Well, actually, I'll let it sit about 10 minutes first. Let this glue gel up, let the squeeze out gel up, skin over, scrape it off, come back in another 30 and take it out. In the meantime, while this is sitting, we're going to take a look at the plans and get the back bracing taken care of. Now this is our stick of back bracing, mahogany bracing. I like using mahogany. The plans say you can use spruce or mahogany. I do prefer mahogany for the back. It is denser, a little more durable, and it holds up better to denting and where you can see through the sound hole into the bracing itself. I want something that's going to hold up better aesthetically than spruce is going to. The color on it also is going to hold up over time better than an unfinished spruce on the interior. Now along this back plate, you can see they have 1, 2, 3, 4 locations for the back braces. And if you see these are more vertical. These, let's call them 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1 and 2, they have more vertical. 3 and 4, they have horizontal, more of a flat bar, and a vertical one drawn in with dashes to note that it's optional or it's a different one that you can do. They note that it is the current style, while the flatter ones are the early style. I think those are very early. As far as I've ever used in the last 15 years, I've always done these more vertical ones. In the lower bout, they are especially helpful to retain that radius on the back. So you can do these flat ones if you want. I'm going to show you my method, the way that I do it, and it's doing all verticals in 1, 2, 3, 4 locations. Now we are at about the 10-minute mark. I pulled the straight edge off so I can get access to this glue. I am just going to use a razor. I prefer the square edge for this particular operation because if I get in there with that point, I can do a little bit of damage to this delicate reinforcement strip. I think we're looking pretty good. We'll let that sit on there another 30 minutes or until we're done with the back braces. Then we'll come back, pull it out of the deck, and install those braces. Now this is our mahogany again, and we really want to make sure that we are as quarter sawn as possible. Looking at this, I'm going to clean this up a little bit. The saw marks were kind of looking like grain lines. Can do that with the sandpaper, razor. These are our grain lines. We want quarter sawn, and this is really about as quarter sawn as you can possibly ask for. I mean, this is just about perfect. Now, if it was off, if it was starting to get a little more rift sawn than quarter sawn, which is our vertical grain, we might want to get, we wouldn't want to turn it over, get us our flat line and plane it, and we would want to get a little creative woodworking wise to get ourselves a nice flat bottom so we could still quarter saw these braces. But we don't need to worry about that. We're perfect the way it is. Now I'm going to get a flat side so I can run this through the saw. I'm going to true this up real quick because I don't want to put this up against a fence if I don't have a flat edge. If I'm going to run this up against the table saw, I really want to get this as square as I can. I've got a little bit of work to do. That's the cut I want. That's nice and wispy. Yeah. Okay. Now I feel good about running this up against the table saw. About 6.5 by 13 and 6.5 by 18 on these second two. Now the way that they've got them, these upper ones, they have a little smaller than these two. I'm going to cut them all at the same size, which on here they've got about 7.5 millimeters by 18. For my guitars, I will typically make all 4 braces about the same size as these. And if you actually look, they have these measurements here for us, which are 6 by 16. I'll usually cut them a little taller and a little bit wider so we can plane those down, get the saw marks out of them, sand anything out of them we need to. So 7.5 millimeters, something like that for the width, and we can plane those down. And then instead of 16 tall, we will probably go like 18, 36 millimeters wide, 36 tall. We've got plenty on here that we can actually run it through the saw, run it once, run it twice, cut it in half, and there's all 4 of our braces. So that is the direction we're going to go. Let's go out to the table saw. Remember, our final measurement is going to be about 6. So I want to get this really closer to 7. Get our squared sides bandsaw is a great alternative for ripping braces. This one I can do pretty quickly. It's nicely set up. I like using the table saw for a lot of operations, but if you don't have one, even a small bandsaw, a benchtop bandsaw, will do the job. You just want to give yourself a little bit more grace with in terms of sizing to account for the blade wander on some of the smaller blades, but you can certainly do it and plane it down later. It'll be perfect. There are a few different ways we can now get these to the right thickness that we want. We are 7.2 right now. A plane is going to work great. The drum sander is going to work awesome. Make sure you've got your planes tuned up, nicely sharpened. We're right at like 605. 605. That one's good. That's exactly where we want to be. Perfect. Okay, next. Okay. Now this, my height is right at about 38. So by the time I take this blade width, saw blade width off, I am really going to be cutting it close. And I'm halfway, 15, 16, 17, maybe right at 17, which is fine. Would like a little more than that. I think it'll work just fine. Yeah. 16 and a half, 17. I'd like a little more leeway, but like I said, that's just the size I ended up with by the time I squared it. But I would rather sacrifice the safety of having a square board going through the table saw than giving myself one more millimeter just to have that extra. So this has had plenty of time in the go bar deck, so I'm going to take these out. I'm going to pull down gently and release it from the top. One of these at a time. Hold it down onto your piece so that this doesn't fly out one way or the other or back at you. Let's move on to the back braces. So the centers of the brace are about 90 millimeters, 175 millimeters, 265 millimeters, and 370. So I'm going to measure those out. I'm going to mark those on here, and then I'm going to lay the braces down on them and see what we have to do to trim them off at the ends. I want to trim those off about there, just a little bit longer than we need. About 10 millimeters longer on each side. I'm going to label these. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to put these in the radius dish, and I want to put these about where they are going to be on the guitar. So 3, 4. All right, now I've got them lined up about how they're going to be on the guitar. And you can see this one, these towards the bottom are longer, so they're going to have the most difference between the bottom of the dish and the bottom of the brace. So we've got the most work to do in those. A little bit on this one, not quite as much as these longer ones in the lower, wider bout. We could sand them, but I want to use a small block plane first. So I'm going to turn this over. If you haven't seen the way I'm doing this, to approach this taper, you want to do a little bit on the end, a little bit longer, a little bit longer, a little bit longer. Okay, now this is almost to the point where we can just start sanding it, because we're really making good contact. So remember, we've got this is a radius, so it's a like a sphere was sitting inside here. So we have radius run in all directions, which means that we want to be careful of rocking it one way or the other. We want to keep it nice and steady and make small movements, because we are going to impart this whole radius into this. So even though front to back isn't far, if we start tipping it over, we're going to ruin our radius and wreck our glue joint. I like to hold them about right here and here, not really on the tips, not right in the center. I don't want to push down and pressure it and pre-stress that. I want to hold it kind of a third of the way in, maybe a quarter of the way in on both sides. That looks like we've really got that. I'm going to chalk this up just to check. That's it. Alright, that one's done. So if you can see, we've imparted that radius, 15-foot radius. Make sure you do have the right radius dish, and we're set. All right, number 3. If we take a look at this on your plans, you can kind of see right in here, 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 here. Now they've dashed these back braces on to the plan. If you take a look, so number 1 is going to go right there. They've got like little ghost shadow dashes on here, so you can keep track of where they're at. Then they don't need a complete plan for just your back braces. Okay, good. Here's number 3 and 4. Now if you look, we are going to come out through the kerfing and through the side, and we're going to butt right up against the binding when the binding goes in. So these need to go all the way through. In order to do that, they need to be shallow enough so that they don't that they aren't taller than the binding, that the binding covers everything up nicely. I want about 2.5 millimeters. don't need to go straight to 2.5, but if we want to look at like 3 millimeters and try and taper our sides so that we have a nice taper coming down from this high spot down into the sides of the guitar. So if that's the shape of our brace, we want about 2.5 millimeters here, and we want to come up and gracefully come into this. I have seen quite a few that come up like this and come up and make a real drastic curl here, and then they just kind of maybe fillet this edge. But we don't want to do this. If we create this dramatic of a curve, the end grain that's coming out right here, that's a lot of stress on that end grain. And if it's flexing and separating, what can happen is right here at any one of these end grains, remember that's end grain that has the potential to split. So we can create stress here that we don't need to. So we want to bring this in, make a nice gradual slope, something like that. That gentle slope in and out of this curve is going to create less stress on the back and give us more support over time. This is bad, this is good. I like the way I drew that, so how long is this? It's about 70 millimeters. Is where I started coming back into it. So let's measure that. All right. Now I'm going to do this for all my braces. All right, now that we've got all the shapes on there, I'm going to take these to the bandsaw and cut these out, and then we can get them glued up. Right, now we have our center lines marked. Now what I want to do is get that about centered. Bring my square in here and get that lined up. All right. I'm going to mark this on the back edge with a mechanical pencil, as fine a line as I can possibly get. Hold this in place. And mark this other side. These two braces you're going to see directly through the sound hole. So it's critical that these are as close as possible and that we don't have big gaps here, because that is going to show off your lack of accuracy and what some would consider a lack of craftsmanship, and we don't want that. Now they're all marked, and what I want to do is come back through, get these cut, and get that chiseled out. We have a few options. We can take a saw and cut. We can go straight at it with the chisel, or we can use a razor blade and a straight edge. I like to come in with a razor blade. This is very soft spruce, so it will cut somewhat easily with just this blade. The downside is that it is such a small blade that it can catch the grain of the spruce, and it can follow it and get a little crooked. I don't think that's happened here. And I come back in with a chisel. And this one, this particular chisel, is a somewhat inexpensive chisel that I shaved. I took to a grinder and ground it to about 1/8 of an inch. Chisel down to that line. Make sure the edge is totally cleaned up and that your brace is going to sit right down onto the wood. So that yellow glue we're using, again, will not stick to itself. So we want to get, scrape right down to that wood. Now let's take a look. Oh yeah. All right. That I'm happy with. We will repeat that process with each one of these. Hopefully, by the time we get down here, we still don't have any gaps. We are good to go here. Now, we're going to glue these in. So I'm going to turn these over. We're going to run a bead of glue down here. We're going to make sure that glue gets on either side of the reinforcement strip to make sure that we have good contact between the brace and the strip. And we're going to go bar them in and let them sit. Put a little bit into here. Now when you put these on, we do want to make sure that we are square, perpendicular to this back strip. We don't want to be off at funky angles because that is going to reflect poorly on our build quality. And you do want to get a bar all the way out onto the tips. I'm happy with that right now. That looks good. We're going to get all these glued up, go barred in, leave them sit for maybe 10 minutes or so, and then we'll come back and take care of the squeeze out that we're seeing. Let's set a timer for 10 minutes, come back and we'll scrape that glue off and we'll let it sit. It's been about 10 minutes and I'm going to come in and with an old piece of binding that I've sharpened down on the edge, I'm going to scrape this glue out of there. So you're going to kind of scrape that top layer of skin, glue skin off, and we can come back with a razor afterward and get the rest of those. And I'll come back over it with a razor. You want to be careful if you're using these pointy ones not to push into the brace and not to scrape directly parallel, well, perpendicular, I guess. If the blade is parallel with the grain, but you're pulling it perpendicular, you can gouge it out. So just be very careful. And keep in mind that everything that you see here is going to be directly seen through the sound hole. This is super important to stay clean and neat and have everything as perfect as you can. You definitely do not want to let this stuff harden up on you and have it so that you have to actually come in with a chisel and gouge things and scrape things and start tearing out wood fibers in order to clean up this glue, because that is going to make it much, much worse. All right, I'm going to do these last few and then check in when I'm done with these, get it all cleaned up. Okay, now we can start pulling this out of the go bar deck. Start pulling these bars off. Again, being careful at the bottom. Hold this in place down here. Pull it off the top. Because now we get to start getting into voicing. It's not really tuning, although we're looking for a tone. We just want it to start sounding like an instrument.